Well, welcome to the October board meeting of the Concord Municipal Light Plant. We'll get underway with the past minutes. We have one set of minutes to review. John sent them around. John, do you have any comments on them before we vote on those minutes that were from September? No, it's great to see that we're up to date on meetings and keeping minutes and keeping current. We'll hope that continues. Does somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes. Sorry, I forget the date now.
September 11th.
September 11th.
A second?
Second.
A second.
Good. Bianca?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the list of upcoming meetings. Most of it is pretty straightforward, but I want to bring your attention to the December meetings. It's a little different than we said previously. The way we've set it up is there's a regular board meeting on December 4th. If everything goes smoothly with the preparation of the budget and rates for 2025, information will be presented in November. We'll be voting on some of it on December 4th, and we should be able to finish our work on December 4th. We're putting a provisional meeting in for December 11th. The only reason we're putting that in there is in case we're unable to finish our business on December 4th, we have a backup because rates have to be set and in place for the new year, and so we can't delay that till January. Any questions or concerns about that?
Just a small request. I didn't get a group invite like we have for the standard meetings. It would be helpful if the board received a meeting on whatever their calendars are.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, for the 4th of December.
For the 4th, yeah. Yeah. Bianca, were you
Yeah,
going to
I got one for the 11th, but not for the 4th.
Okay, great. Good point. Thanks. Well, let's go to the chair's update. The one item I want to mention is that if folks look around on your screen, you will not notice Alice Kaufman from our board here. She has resigned from the board. She had alerted me a few months ago that this might be necessary. She has a lot of competing commitments, and she took on a new town committee role, serving on the town moderator's town meeting revision committee, and they're doing a lot of work and have a lot of meetings, and so she felt she needs to resign. That's unfortunate, but understandable. Alice has been a very strong board member. She's contributed a lot over many years, not just to this board, but to many committees and roles in the town. So we thank her for her service. What that means is for those of us who remain on the board, there's until a replacement for Alice is put in place, it's really crucial that we attend meetings to maintain a quorum. And if there's for some reason you can't attend a meeting, please let Jason know as soon as you can, because we need at least 3 people for a quorum. Any questions about that? Yeah, Brian.
Will Carrie be making a new appointment?
Yes, she will be. Yeah. And let me turn it over to Jason for the director's report.
Thank you. I first wanted to thank the Light Board for their participation in the process for the CMLP Permanent Director search and their support. I was appointed as the Permanent Director on September 16th by the Town Manager. I really continue, I look forward to continuing to work with you guys and the community and achieving a lot of the goals that we have. It's just really an exciting time in the Light Plant's history. On Monday of this week, Carrie appointed Amalia McCaffrey, who is our IT operations manager, to the role of interim CIO. And so that means that for the first time in 9 months, I've got just one job. So that's terrific. I'm really excited. Amalia is incredibly capable and she's going to do a terrific job in this interim role. So I'm really excited about that. Shifting to our audit, we were supposed to have our Financial Audit Advisory Committee meeting later today to discuss the CMLP audit for the calendar year 2023. Unfortunately, Markham has not completed the audit. The way that this works is that we have a local partner who oversees the audit team. They completed the site work back in April of this year. The draft audit was done a couple months later. Our auditors, Melanson and Heath, have been acquired by a larger company. And so as part of that company's standards, now they do a national review after the partner review. And so that national review enters a pipeline of many other audits and is just waiting for this. So there's no problems with it. We've seen the draft. It's been circulated to internal staff, and there are no issues that were raised with it. It's just that we have to wait for this before they can call it the final draft. So Anthony has postponed that meeting for the Financial Audit Advisory Committee, but as soon as we get it from them, we should be able to reschedule that. I did speak to Scott, the partner working on the audit yesterday, and he said that he thought this was like 1 to 2 weeks. It's not going to be months and months, so that's good. And again, we're hopeful that the numbers don't change as a result for any journal entries that need to be made, but he feels very strongly that this is in good shape and will not change. I wanted to mention that our EV showcase last month went off without a hitch. That was on September 14th. Jan, Pamela, Ethan, Kim, Laura, and their whole teams and all the other volunteers did an excellent job putting this together. Brian was there, maybe others were there too. It was a great event. We had many different vehicles represented, and I think 135 or more people who stopped by to take a look at the vehicles and get information about both electric vehicles, electric bikes, and see the different types and learn about the credits that we offer and the options for getting electric vehicles. So it's a lot of work that goes into that event. I'm very grateful for the people that spent that time doing it. I wanted to shift to battery storage and some solar expansion updates. So we've wrapped up our conversations with Baker Tilly. They were the firm that we used to learn more about the direct pay and the elective pay for getting some of that Inflation Reduction Act credit money and making sure that we maximize those dollars. We are still waiting for a couple studies from PLM, who's our vendor that helps us study distribution capabilities and transformers, power protection schemes. We're trying to understand what can be allowable at the landfill and other sites that we're considering for battery storage. We've had several meetings with MWEC, and they have a pre-negotiated contract with a vendor that can be used kind of out of the box for municipal light plants. And we've been considering that as an option too, just for one of the several batteries that we've talked about. There are benefits and drawbacks to that, but we've learned a lot. And I think the more contacts we make, we're going to be able to put forward a better project, because every time we talk to somebody new, we're then following that lead down and talking to the end user and the end system to figure out how they liked that model and what worked and what didn't work. And we can avoid some of the pitfalls that have landed on other people. At a recent PERMA conference, Laura attended a seminar from Aegis, our excess insurance company, on battery storage loss prevention, and they have agreed to come to the light plant and do a presentation on that. This is really exciting because we have a lot of different stakeholders in town who are not very familiar with energy storage. We're obviously thinking about putting a big battery at the school. We have electrical and building inspectors who have to inspect these things. We have the fire department that needs to ensure that it's going to comply with state and federal standards on fire safety. And so this will be a great opportunity to bring all of these stakeholders together and talk about some of the concerns that have popped up in other communities, so we can hopefully avoid delays and other difficulties with just sort of assuming that people are equipped to deal with this new technology and some of the fire suppression and safety systems that go along with it. So I'm really grateful that Laura brought back that lead and that they're able to come here. I have a couple other updates, but we have an agenda topic related to the middle school, so I'm going to save those. Shifting to advanced metering, we're over 99% done with residential meters. The reason we didn't get to 100 yet is because we have several meters that need to be reprogrammed, and Eaton is waiting for us to complete some steps before they can do that. So we have shifted to commercial installs, and we're already about 9% done with commercial installs, and we still are able to do a few residential ones. I think there's under 70 left. So for all intents and purposes, we consider this kind of the shifting of the phase from residential to commercial, and the team's doing a great job with that work. Some of the commercial meters can be installed without an impact to the business. So they have a mechanism where when you pull the meter, there's still load continuity, so there's no impact to the business. Other times when you pull the meter, it cuts the power to the business. So we are being very proactive to work with people to try to make sure that it has as little impact on the business as possible, and are allowing people to schedule things if necessary. So so far people have been very accommodating, and it is usually a very, very short amount of time that you're without power. But some businesses that are larger may have a lot of HVAC systems or other systems that can't just be lose power and then have power re-energized. So we're just trying to work with them and make sure that we're not too impactful to their business. I wanted to mention that we have 2 crew members, line crew members, who went down to South Carolina to help with power restoration down there after Hurricane Helene. This is Rich Fideli and Matt McNamara. Rich is a crew leader, Matt is a grade 2 line worker. They left, I think, last Wednesday and started working the next day. They've been working 16-hour days. They get fed at 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. and are working all day in between. They have lodging provided. All of the costs associated with mutual aid requests like this are borne by the requesting community or entity. And so, there's a little bit of wear and tear on our vehicle, but that's pretty much it. This is a terrific opportunity for them to help out people who are still in need, still without power, these, almost weeks later from this. We got a wonderful email from a resident down there in Lawrence, South Carolina, whose power was restored by our team, and just expressing their gratitude for us being willing to send people down there to help them. This has been a team effort. A huge shout out to Mike Hugendorn, our line supervisor, for pulling the team together and finding a way to provide coverage so that we could allow this opportunity, in addition to helping out and just being a part of the mutual aid system, which later benefits Concord if we ever have a problem as well. It's also a wonderful training experience for them. We might have 1 or 2, hopefully knock on wood, large outage events here in Concord a year, but this really gives a lot of exposure to kind of some of the challenges that you face when you have a really big outage and you need to restore a lot of sort of distribution lines. So yeah, we do expect that they're going to come home later this week, probably at the end of the week. Last time I checked, they had about 7,000 to 9,000 people still out, but and unfortunately they're kind of the onesie twosies right now with people who are very isolated and remote. Lawrence is an electric co-op, so this is a public power entity. And typically for mutual aid, we start with the public power entities before the IOUs, but we have done mutual aid for both, and it just depends on who's requesting. Some of the folks that are doing mutual aid as part of the APPA or the NEPA request are staying down there for Hurricane Milton, anticipating need to help. I think for our resource load, we're probably not going to do that, but we're just going to have to see how the week goes and how the team is. We can recall them at any time if they're needed for our operations, or to provide relief for them if they need a break. So Mike has been in constant contact with them, talking to them twice a day just to make sure that they're okay and feel like conditions are still safe and supportive, and everything is looking good. So I just am really grateful that there are people like that willing to help in these difficult times. We've been spending a lot of time working on the 2025 budget forecast. Big thanks to Laura, Joe, Jeff, Dale, Sandy, and others who are helping out with preparing these materials. Matt gave us some great guidance before he left, but it is a lot of work and for people that aren't used to doing this. So again, our goal, Warren mentioned the timeline. Our goal is to try to get the budget to the board by November 1st, which would allow a week and a half or so of review and opportunity to ask questions directly to us before the board meeting on November 13th. So let's see. And then the last thing I want to mention was just that we had 4 staff members attend the MIC, which is the user conference for NISC in Orlando. This was Sandy, Jim, Chris, and Marty. And they came back with new contacts from other municipal light plants here in Massachusetts, information about how to use our software better. Jim looked at it from the GIS and the mapping side, Sandy from the financial side, Marty from the electrical side, and Chris from the customer service side. So this software is the software we use for everything. It's our customer resource management system. It's our ERP. And so to have folks get this engaged and learn this much has just been really fantastic. So I thank them for their attendance and their renewed excitement. That's all I've got.
Hey, thanks very much, Jason. There was a lot going on. It's especially good to see staff getting out both at the conferences, and it's especially great that we have 2 people helping out in South Carolina. Any questions or comments, Brian? You're on mute.
Yeah, I got it. Jason, the meters that we're installing, now that we've got quite a few installed, one of the features of the meter was that if the individual meter couldn't reach a gateway, that it would jump the communication from one meter to the next meter until it could get to a gateway. How is the communication with these meters going? Is it going well? Is it living up to the expectation?
That's a great question. So yes and no. They do. It's called a self-healing mesh. So if it loses a path, it will find another one. We are finding that's true. The thing that we're finding that's sort of less than we expected was that sometimes that repathing takes a lot longer than you would think. So even in days or weeks for it to find a permanent new path. We have had several gateways go down due to malfunctions with the physical hardware that we were shipped or software problems. And so I think we've got 4 that have been returned at this point and come back. And I think we're still waiting for 1 or 2. So we are really seeing that when a gateway gets pulled or when it crashes and goes down, that the meters have to find a new path. And they are. I think the concern is that if a meter then takes several hours or days to sort of report data, it might be okay for billing purposes, but it's not okay for outages and for figuring out, what's going on. And it's also not good for a customer who might be looking to watch their consumption or try to figure out how to shift their load from a different time. So they're addressing that. And we have a contract that guarantees a certain amount of connectivity and uptime and delays before we get the data. And Eaton is working at that. And so I feel like we are having some communication with them on a regular basis still. We still have these biweekly project update meetings. And then we had a gateway expert and a meter expert on site last week for the full week to try to address some of these issues. So they are working at it and it is improving. But I think that when the gateways were all there, we were happy with the level of performance we were seeing. And when we plug in a new meter, it would find a new path pretty quickly. So once we get to a point where everything is kind of operating as we expect, I think that we're going to be in good shape.
Great.
Any other questions? Well, thanks, Jason. Let's go on to the broadband update.
Thank you. I wanted to mention that we had a network engineer that we had extended an offer to last month, and that person accepted the position and had cleared the background hurdles. But unfortunately, they had some medical issues, personal medical issues, and did not ultimately end up taking the job. So we've re-advertised that position and have had over 50 applicants in the last week. Dale and I have been going through those and are hoping to get a panel together soon to start interviews again. This seems like a perpetual position that we're interviewing for. We have an excellent employee right now who knows so much about our system and has good history with us. So we're in good shape, but we'd love for somebody, even more junior person, to come on board to learn and provide more coverage for the team. So excited to get that role filled. I did want to mention that I said that Amalia had been appointed as the interim CIO. Broadband is still going to stay under my umbrella, and I think this makes sense from a CMLP perspective. Broadband is a subsidiary of the light plant, and I've got almost 3 years of experience managing that team. So I think it's going to be a good combination. Also, Dale has worked at Cisco for, I think, 25 years and has a lot of great leadership experience working at kind of a larger company. And I think that will be great on our leadership team here to just kind of broaden our perspective. We continue to work on the design of the new 10 gig system that we're speccing out. We are just trying to figure out the right switches to add into the mix. We have all the quotes needed, and you'll see this money forecasted for 2025. And it's going to be a really exciting project because we'll be able to offer speeds of up to 10 gigs to customers, which would allow us to pick up places like Emerson Hospital or the school district, other businesses that really expect that. But also, it's going to save us a lot of capital costs in the long run without having to run new fiber, because we can increase the saturation of each single strand of fiber to many, many more customers, right? So if you can provide up to 10 gigs on a single fiber, whereas today it's 2 or 2.5, then you can, by 5 times increase the number of customers without having to run new fiber to an area. So it's going to be really good for multiple reasons. And the last thing I just want to mention is that when Brian had that great question about the connectivity between meters, one of the other things that we can do is they have these IP link meters. These IP link meters actually use our fiber network to be a backup gateway, basically. And we've got about, I can't remember now, 70 to 100 of these meters installed that could provide a really good backup. But the way that we connect our organization to Eaton's does not allow for the traffic to travel. So the way that all of our other data is going, it doesn't work for that. So we had to set up our own sort of local server to collect that data and then pass it through. And there's been a lot of problems with getting that going, because it's really not a typical way that Eaton does things. And really that we're kind of hampered by the security, because instead of having Eaton hosted directly, they have a more secure third-party hosted company, and that company doesn't allow this type of traffic. So we keep making strides, but Dale has been working several hours each day with multiple vendors to try to figure out how to get this to work, and we're very close. So once we get that done, we'll actually have a backup path so that if a gateway goes down, traffic can reroute to a much faster way onto fiber. So that'll be really exciting when we have that up and running. And I think we purchased about 700 of those meter types, and we expect to have a couple hundred that would be directly connected to the fiber once they're fully deployed, with more possible in the future. And this will just result in faster data coming back to the server and then to customers, and for time of use and any other purpose. That's all I've got for the broadband update.
Thank you. Any questions on broadband? Yes, Brian.
Jason, so you had said you'll continue to be the broadband lead. Do you see that going indefinitely, or do you feel that, within a year we would have someone in your former role?
So when I say broadband is reporting up to me, Dale is the broadband manager and managing that team of people. So I don't have day-to-day involvement in managing that. It's just more just like Laura and Joe and Carol and Matt's team reporting up to me. So I think that that's going to be a permanent arrangement, but we'll obviously look at the staffing requirements and see if more help is needed. But our anticipation is that with Dale as the division manager, that it'd be not a lot of work on my plate for day to day. I'm not going to be doing network engineering or running cables or anything for broadband. It's just more part of the strategic CMLP family.
One follow-up. Would it be appropriate for Dale to do the broadband updates in these meetings?
Yes, earlier on when I first started doing it, well, we didn't have a Dale early on, but later on when we hired a Dale, there were so many projects that I was just really worried about the ask for him. But absolutely going forward, it'd be great to have him attend the meetings and provide those updates.
Excellent.
Anything else? Well, let's go on to time of use rate timeline, and let me introduce this by saying, you know, we're going to be making a big transition in the light plant here. We want to make sure we do it well. We want to make sure we do it with good input and careful deliberation on the part of the board, and that everybody is comfortable that we're doing this in the right way. And so for that reason, we all need to have a shared sense of how the whole thing will be rolled out, and that everybody feels comfortable that there will be enough time and opportunity for board input. And so with that in mind, is Laura, are you going to talk about the timeline on here?
I'm gonna tee it off and then I'll hand
Okay, great. Please.
So just a reminder, the goal here is to develop a default opt-out time of use residential rate. We discussed kind of the broad strokes of doing this at our last meeting and gave kind of a very rough timeline. But we wanted to go into more specifics about month by month what needs to happen at the light board specifically. And then we're going to share a little bit too about some of the other aspects that we're going to be focusing on. So there are multiple categories of things that we've identified. There's obviously the light board and the, sort of group decisions, strategic things that we need to decide. But then there's also the technical work that needs to happen behind the scenes to make sure that we're achieving our milestones to make this happen. And then there's the customer education and outreach that needs to happen, right? We're asking customers to think about their electricity usage in a very different way. And that's going to be a huge piece of the success of this plan, is to make sure that they're educated. So we're going to review the board actions first, and then I'll pull up a spreadsheet. And the reason for doing that is that we'd love to get the board's input. And if you want to see something sooner, we can easily move it around now. If you want to see it later, or you want to see it again, or there's another topic that we missed that you want to include, we'll just be able to add it for our notes, and then that can inform the schedule going forward. So I'll share my screen, and Laura, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Jason, and good morning, everyone. So here's one of the requests was to outline on a meeting by meeting date basis what decisions the board would need to be making in order for us to be able to offer this default opt-out time of use rate to be effective on January 1st, 2026. So what we did, the team got together here, mainly Carol, Donna, and myself, and worked backwards from needing to have the rates programmed in the system in December of 2025 to what would need to be decided in order for everything to happen in between. So one of the first items on our list of things the board needs to decide is determining the level of detail that we present on the bills. You may be aware that some years ago, I think around 2015, the light board decided that we should unbundle the retail rate that we charge customers and show the customers how much of that rate is due to energy, how much is due to capacity and transmission, and how much is made up of our local distribution costs. So when customers see their bill now, they get quite a few line items showing, the breakout of the total rate. When we go to time of use, we're going to need to present information to the customer for each time period. If we have three, and we are currently showing, 3 lines per rate, we're talking about 9 lines of information. So the level of detail on the bill will get complex. And so I want the board to, I think it would be a good idea if the board would take a look at how they think the information should be best presented to customers. My hope is to get the board some examples of other utilities that offer time of use rates to see how they present the information to their customers, And maybe that can help spur the discussion about what would be most appropriate for CMLP. And the reason that has to happen early on in the process is that it may seem not intuitive, but it takes NISC quite a while. They have to do a lot of programming to make our bills look the way they do. And so when we decide, if we decide to change that, actually, we will be changing it because we'll be going to time of use. They need to reprogram CMLP's billing process. And it takes a while for that to happen. So we want this item to be addressed early in the timeline. In December, I'm hoping to provide some lessons learned from other utilities that have gone to opt out time of use rates, such as the Sacramento Municipal Utility District and some utilities in Canada. I don't know that we'll get them to speak to us. That would be ideal, but we can at least have conversations with them and summarize, some of the findings that they will provide us, hopefully. In January, we think it would be a good idea to address the residential rate assistance rate. The decision here that the board needs to make is how the credit will be applied. Currently, on the residential assistance rate, the customer is charged the full residential rate, but then they receive a credit of more than half of that cost, but only on the first 657 kilowatt hours. So if the regular rate's 20 cents and they use 1,000 kilowatt hours, and they get a credit of 13 cents on 657, but then they pay the 20-cent rate on the rest of the volume between 657 and 1,000. So when we go to time of use and we're no longer measuring the kilowatt hours, in those tiers, do we want the credit to apply to 100% of the residential rate assistance qualified customers' bills, regardless of how many kilowatt hours they use? That's something the board, I think, would need to weigh in on. And then in February, we do need to start thinking about, or decide on rather, how we want to handle the electric thermal storage, whether it will remain a separate rate or whether it will be collapsed and folded into the time of use rate, with those customers then paying the time of use pricing for their ETS usage. All those customers currently have separate meters on the units, so it is fairly easy to measure the kilowatt hours used by just the ETS versus the rest of their household usage. In March, I think it would be a good idea for us to be looking comprehensively at the second meter fee issue and the potential for CMLP to offer virtual net metering. This is where a customer can take kilowatt hours that register on one meter and have them apply to a bill that is for another meter. So for example, someone who has a separate meter to charge an electric vehicle in their garage, that's a separate building. They have a house usage and they have this garage usage. And the virtual net metering would allow the customer to take the kWh used by the car and offset, for example, their usage if they're a solar net meter in the house. So we'd be crossing two different rate schedules potentially. Anyway, it's sort of a big issue, and we need to decide whether it's appropriate for CMLP to offer that. There are other utilities that do offer that. And I think we, again, should be looking during this timeline about lessons learned from other utilities. We don't need to reinvent the wheel for ourselves every time. Let's find out what worked and what didn't work for others. I would like to hire our cost of service study consultant by late spring or early summer in 2025, even though they won't start on their numeric study of the metered usage until July, because I think they can be presenting the board with their expert advice on what are the options for billing solar net metering under a time of use rate. And the other important topic is how differentiated should the pricing tiers be? Should the on-peak be twice as expensive as the off-peak? Should it just be a few pennies more than the off-peak? What will our strategy be for rolling out the time of use pricing tiers? Then once we get some information from them, it is going to be very important for the board to discuss and determine how the new solar net metering rate is going to work under time of use. You may be aware that the current solar net metering rate was settled upon after a very long multi-year discussion of how it should work. And so I'm hoping that we won't need to repeat that process, because that would mean solar net metered customers wouldn't be able to take advantage of time of use until we figure that out. So I'm hoping with the consultant presenting some options and discussing the pros and cons, that the board could discuss and determine how they want to treat the solar net metering under time of use. And then by August, we would need the board to determine what our strategy is going to be for the tier pricing differentials. Are they going to be wide apart? Are they going to be just a few pennies different? And solar net metering. And that's because by September, we want the time of use rate established. This would be the consultant having reviewed the metering data starting in July and doing their work in July and August to come up with what they propose the time of use rate should be to collect the revenue requirement. And that would be the revenue requirement based on 2025 costs. We would offer that new time of use rate to a select number of volunteers during October, November, and December to bill under the new rate, to test it from a systems perspective and for the customers to see how it's working. We would then, in November, once the budget is established, need to update that rate that the consultant came up with based on 2025 costs and figure out what it would be with 2026 costs. And then in December, the Light Board would approve that 2026 rate to become effective for all the residential customers who don't opt out. And I believe we've had, Jason, remind me, it's been quite a few, 30 or 40 customers have already opted out.
Yeah, it was like 36 or 35.
Yeah, somewhere around there. So any questions on this board decision timeline?
Yes, I'd like to let folks come in, and I'll turn to you in a second, John, but I have one request in terms of thinking about, we have some board members who have not been here for any discussions of time of use rate, and hopefully we'll have a new board member as well. I think before we get into all the details on all these things, at the next meeting, we need an overview of time of use rates, how they work, what are the general parameters of options with them. And, you talked about a lot of these very specific issues like the residential assistance rates or the energy thermal storage and that sort of thing. But the key decision for the board is ultimately going to be, what are the hours we're going to choose for time of use rates and what are the rate differentials? And I see that we're going to get into the details on that next August. But I think before we start this whole process, the board should have a sense of the big picture, and I'd like to see that at the next meeting. Other board members could let me know if they disagree with that, but John.
Yeah, Warren, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, Laura, this is very helpful. It's really helps to kind of understand, and I think there's some good thought that's gone into identifying the various issues, and it seems like it's a very measured pace with given the significance of the decision. one thing, maybe it's will be reflected in terms of the lessons learned from other utilities, but I'm thinking that it might warrant a special treatment here would be the public information campaign. I just see that as being, critical to success of the program. So I'm just thinking that might warrant discussion at a meeting at some
So,
point.
John, maybe this slide we've presented here is just what we foresee the board needing to do, but we have another slide that shows other paths that need to be happening simultaneous to the board decisions, such as the public outreach and what our plan is for that. So maybe I thank you, Jason, for putting this up, because if others had questions about that, I want you to just understand there are other tracks that are happening at the same time with the board decisions.
Yeah, I just pulled that up. This can be part of the conversation. So as I mentioned before, we have those 3 buckets, and you see the technical, the customer communication, the light board. So we've been focusing on the light board today, but we have identified kind of what other things need to happen on these other ends. So as we have this discussion, feel free to mention things in any bucket. We can add them now and make sure it gets incorporated.
That's great. And then one offer I will make, you had indicated that you were hoping to reach out to some utilities, and in particular Canadian utilities. We have offices in Calgary and Toronto, and as you're probably aware, Ontario was one of the early adopters of AMI technology. So I'm assuming that there might be some Ontario utilities where we have many relationships that you'd be interested in talking to, and we can certainly facilitate that.
Yeah, Toronto Hydro in particular.
Yeah, they're a good client, so we can definitely reach out to
That
me,
would
and
be tremendously helpful, John.
I'm more than happy to help there.
I'll send you an email with some requests.
Of course.
Thanks, John. Brian's next.
Hi, so yeah, there's a lot to do here, and it's great that we have it mapped out on the schedule. You had mentioned, Warren, that the big part of the board is deciding what hours and what ratio we're going to apply to the rate, where, what's on peak versus off peak. I think we also, as a board, need to talk about the purpose of applying a time of use rate. It's not only to collect for when people are consuming electricity, but it's also to get people to invest in their own control and their own understanding of electricity, such that we get good behavior from them, as well as good investment, whether it be home storage or other aspects where people were willing to put their capital into helping level out our load because of this rate. So I just want to make sure that's part of our discussions and philosophy thinking going into making these rates.
Thanks. Thank you. And Bianca.
Yeah, so I'll quickly add on to what Brian said, and then I have another point to make. Regarding in terms of the big purpose, I think one thing that would also be helpful to communicate out to customers is the bigger, broader picture in terms of climate change and mitigating emissions. And as far as I understand, reducing peak load also, if everybody in the country were to reduce peak load, it would really also reduce the peaker plants, demand on peaker plants, right? Which are typically the worst kind of emitting power. They're typically the coal, they're like the worst. So if we can all reduce peak power, it goes a long way into reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that if we can put that in include that as part of the communication to our residential and commercial customers, I think it would go a long way to get cooperation. So it's not just about reducing our costs, but really, it's about fossil fuel emissions. And then the other point that I wanted to make is that, first of all, thank you, Laura. I think that schedule and timeline is terrific. The one thing that it kind of worries me is that there are at least 2 issues on there that we've already brought to discussion and it remained unresolved, which was the ETS rates as well as the second meter. And we kind of, I'm wondering if we should maybe front load that to get that sorted out now ahead of the time of use, because one way or another it needs to be addressed. And if we could fold it into, well, if we get it resolved, then maybe it will, because the time of use is only going to complicate matters. Anyway, it was just, I know it's been a discussion, and I don't know if it's, do we?
So Bianca, just to note, we have an agenda item later this meeting on second meter fees. And we're gonna propose a temporary solution and then try to come up with a more permanent fix later. But we could take your suggestion now up in that discussion, and maybe we should do it differently. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, let's definitely discuss it. I was just, well, hopefully we'll come to, if we can, yeah. Anyway, I'm all in, yeah.
Great, thanks on those comments. Brian?
One other request. Could we add educating the board on our substation load? Load profiles are something that only the WOCs really get into, and it would be good for the board to understand when Concord uses a lot of electricity, when it doesn't, whether that be seasonal, daily, or throughout the month, and when those RNS fees kind of apply most often, because that's a big part of time of use is controlling cost and expense. That's its purpose. So understand an educational agenda item on load would be helpful.
That sounds, that's a very good idea. I had one question or concern, and that has to do with this getting volunteers to participate in a trial run on this. I was wondering whether that's coming too late in the process to actually provide us with any useful data. At that point, we will have set the rates. There's only a couple of months before the end of the year in 2025. What happens if we learn that it's not working well? What are we going to learn from that trial? And either should it not happen, or if it's going to happen, should it happen sooner in the year using, even if they're not the definitive rates, using tentative rates, so that we actually get some data that could be useful in setting the permanent rates.
So you're suggesting, Warren, that the rates that we would charge the volunteers would not be based on a cost of service study
Right.
analysis. It would be sort of proxy rates?
Yeah, it would be our best guess of what the rates might be, or might be. I'm not exactly sure, but it just seems like doing the trial that late in the year, I'm not sure what the purpose of it is, because it's going to come too late to do anything.
So, Carol, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, one of the other factors that needs to be considered in this, we still need to get the rate set up in the billing system and also work with NISC bill print programming to have any of these rate changes, even if it's a mock-up rate, to get it programmed so that it'll appear on the bill correctly and also bill correctly. So there are some, I guess, gating items that need to be completed first before we can actually do a test pilot. So, you know, Laura and I can take a look at the timeline again and see if we can tighten it up a little bit. But there is still some lead time for the bill print programming and the rate to be set up in the system.
Okay, no, I understand, and maybe it can't be done sooner, but if it can't be done sooner, what's the point of it?
I think it's also a technical, making sure that we iron out issues, because if we're going to send out 8,000 bills with mistakes, it's a lot better to send out 20 bills with mistakes for people who understand that
Okay.
they're testing out a new system. So it definitely has some value, but I agree. I see your point that having that data would be nice to know, before we set the rate. But I think this is going to be, and that's part of our messaging, right? Will be that this is not we set the time of use rate, now we're all done, we can all go home, right? We're going to constantly have to tweak this, both because of power supply costs, transmission costs, but also just because we need to make sure that it's adequately collecting, the revenue that we need to fund everything. So, and implementing the rate for a period of time may shift, people's consumption, which may lead to different revenue models, which may require us to change it again, right? So it may require tweaks for a little while until the changes are minor and routine.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Now, you had some additional slides in the packet. Are you going to want to show those or
Those
not? I mean,
slides,
this is
yeah.
great that you thought this out in such detail, and
I
it
think those
suggests we have a lot to do.
Yeah, those are more along the lines of things that we would use to help educate people when we start to give
Okay.
broad strokes. That one slide had everything on it, so it's kind of a duplicate of that. So we don't need to share that.
Right. Well, we're going to look forward to learning a lot about time of use rates and grappling with a lot of issues. Let's go on to the Aegis presentation.
Great. Let me just get my screen share ready and
The much delayed Aegis presentation, I should say.
so Aegis, again, I mentioned them in my director's update there at the beginning, that they are our excess insurance company. And I believe it was Carol who initially had some contact or attended a training or something with them, or heard that they offered these assessments. And they don't do many each year, just a couple. But what they'll do is they'll come into a utility, and they will just look at their operations, at their call center procedures, and provide recommendations, right? So it's not a formal audit. They're not dinging you or penalizing you for anything. They understand that you're willingly submitting to this assessment, and in exchange, they're going to help you with loss avoidance and with dealing with risk. They're going to help you identify best practices and give you recommendations on how you can, again, prevent safety issues or any losses that you would see. The person who came out, Annie Wong, she is a senior electric utility professional, and she absolutely knew her stuff. Joe and his team were really impressed with her level of knowledge. She could cite the National Electric Safety Code, chapters and sections and everything. And, she was very open, as open as we were with her. She was open with us, and it was just a really positive experience. I commend the team for being willing to submit to something like this, because it is a level of vulnerability when you say, hey, come into our substation and take a look at this. And they spent a lot of time with her as they walked around and looked at various things. I think it was around 3 days of time for several people, Joe and Jeff and Mike and Laura and Carol and all of their teams. So I'm just going to run through this presentation, which summarizes some of the key findings from that. So let me move to the next slide. So they provide about 40% of our excess liability coverage. We kind of covered all those things. The actual assessments were back in April, end of April, early May. So the areas of study are on the screen here. So a lot of what they do is substation work, and we don't have any generation in town. We're receiving everything at substation 219 on Forest Ridge. So there were some things that didn't apply, and there were some things that they typically look for, like substation construction standards that, we might conduct a substation every 50 years or, or less often. And so those aren't areas that they really focused on. But you can see here some other things that they did focus on that do apply to us, like pole inspections or vegetation management. These joint pole things. We have half of the poles in town are maintained by Verizon and half are maintained by CMLP. So, questions about that. And then the call handling situations, where they look at all of our operations related to receiving calls from customers and the safety implications of that. And then you can just see public safety awareness and education, as well as contractor safety and awareness. So to prepare for this, we discussed the areas of focus many times to review what policies we might have documented or what procedures we had. We had to fill out some questionnaires for them so that they could be prepared ahead of their site visits. And then, as I said, it was about 2 to 3 days for all these staff members at all times escorting the assessor around. So the recommendations came out in several different buckets. So I have a slide that shows you the different buckets. So, to me, we want recommendations. We don't want to just hear like, oh, you guys are doing pretty good. Like I think she was incredibly impressed with the professionalism of our team and Joe's knowledge of safety and code. We did have some recommendations that came out of it, and these are kind of the areas that I bucketed them into. So you can see education is up there, and I'll get into more specific examples of what these are. But things like signage, just having a sign with a phone number on it, or naming the utility on the outside perimeter of the substation. Training, whether it's internal people or external stakeholders, documentation, for example, substation inspection forms, keeping them standardized and having them on hand and scanned or electronic, things like that. Code review, looking at the code and making sure that we're following the guidelines on that. So I'm going to go into some specific examples now. So for some of these buckets, I'll kind of drive down a little bit deeper. So for example, on signage, this perimeter fencing signage, or with our contact information, even indoors in a substation, some of the safety issues or things you could mention to people who enter. Some of the inspection plan examples include overhead distribution system, pad mounted equipment, or wooden pole plans. So, we want to inspect these on a routine basis. We want to log those inspections and make sure that we can produce them so that if somebody says, when was this pole last inspected, we could pull out its history and say, oh, it was inspected 2 years ago, and we will re-inspect it at this interval. So we do a lot of these things. We don't document all of them all the time. And so, is having these inspection plans and then following them and documenting the results of them. Some education examples include providing education to school-age children. We recently participated in a Touch a Truck at one of our local elementary schools or early childhood centers, and there is a lot that we could be doing to get into schools to, usually around fourth and fifth grade, they start with fire safety, and we could also create programs for electric safety for students. And then also first responders, we do work very closely with police and fire, and they kind of generally know the do's and don'ts, but making sure that there's a formal training program for these folks. Sometimes they arrive on scene, they get out of their vehicle, and unbeknownst to them, there may be a wire down that's creating current that could electrocute them because they're not wearing the proper boots to address that. So just making sure that we don't have people who show up on scene and try to fix something, or at least create a safe area, and they could be in harm's way. And then, construction or contractors, private tree trimmers, in a private residence, or anybody that interacts with our system, just making sure that we have, materials, training, a policy, a website, something that we can give to them to make sure that we standardize that information handoff to make sure that they're going to be as safe as possible. Some of the documentation examples, I alluded to that substation inspection form and storing those. And then also utilizing a work order management system for all issues. We do have a work order system with NISC, And so, that's how the majority of the work happens for us. But for all issues being reported, we're not necessarily creating a work order for those and tracking it. So the recommendation was to sort of figure out exactly what buckets of things we are going to track and then enter those in there so that we can produce results after the fact and say, okay, here's exactly the date that we did this inspection because we logged it in the system, and we can tell you who did it and who worked on it and how long it took. Some of the SOP examples were developing, policies and procedures on the reconnection of customer power or tagging rejected wooden poles or trouble call dispatching. I want to say one of the things that was pretty neat that they did was they called our customer service team as a customer and reported an unsafe condition to see how that call would be handled. And I'm pretty sure it was Chris who took the call, and she handled it perfectly. But, it might not be something that you think about a customer service representative knowing, but they really need to understand that when somebody reports flickering lights or certain conditions that can be a sign of something very unsafe in the house, that they can ask the right questions and then refer that to the right team, right? If it's like, oh, check your light bulb, you're probably fine, right? You need to know the warning signs. And in this case, she did a perfect job. And that's just one of those things that, we need to make sure our people are trained on. And Carol and Donna do a terrific job at doing that. And I think I told the board earlier when we hired our new customer service specialist that the training is really like a 6-month to a year training. And that's why. It's because you need to get familiar with all the different types of calls and warning signs that you might see and know when you need to refer those to engineering or have somebody come out immediately or call the police and fire if it's a truly emergency issue. So, and we have those SOPs, but I think in dispatching, right? Like, who is the CSR going to after they receive the call, and how are they reporting it, and where is it being logged so that it's handed off appropriately? So some of the final takeaways were, they provided a form so we could track all these, and we will track all of them so we can kind of mark our compliance. Some, like a sign, are very easy, and so those can be done pretty quickly. Others, educating school-age children may take quite a while before we have the program spun up, but we're committed to taking a look at all of these and figuring out which ones, prioritizing them and figuring out how we can achieve them all. We've already begun to take some of these things into consideration, looking at our vegetation management plan and our pole inspection plan. Joe and I have had several conversations about those. And then again, using that internal tracker. And I'm just really grateful that we have a team so willing to provide this level of introspection and make sure that we improve at every level. So I think I'll pause there and then allow the board to ask questions or provide input.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on this?
Just a quick comment that this is a great exercise to do, and I'm glad to hear the results were positive.
Yeah. I have a comment and a question. The comment to reiterate what Brian said, it's great that you did it, and it's great that the staff went into this willingly and was willing to undertake the screening and scrutiny. I have a question for Joe about this, because I know Joe has given high priority to safety and his efforts and to some of these issues. Did you end up, and do you feel the staff in general ended up feeling okay about these recommendations and feeling they make sense and feel comfortable with the implementation of them?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think everybody did, feel comfortable. We had some great conversations with Annie when she was here. Again, to reiterate what, Jason was saying, very knowledgeable in all of this. She guided us through everything, all of her, thoughts and processes, and explain things, show us the codes. So we didn't have any issues with any of that. I think one of the biggest takeaways is a lot of things that we do that we just don't take credit for ourselves. We do routine pole inspections, we do, a lot of the pad mounted stuff, but there's never really been a way to, you know, or any tracking of that. So it's not that it's not happening, it's just that we don't take the credit for it. But that's something now that we're gonna, you know, obviously change, as it's been identified as a potential risk.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks for sharing all this, and let's go on to the next agenda item, which is the second meter fee. And, you know, at least when Jason and Laura and I were talking about this, and maybe the board won't agree, our sense was things may change for some of the folks with second meters when we transition to time of use rates. And we should think about what time of use rates might mean for these customers. And instead, what we should do at the moment is to just put something in place that we acknowledge is a temporary fix to provide some relief to some of these customers in the short run, but knowing that we have to look at this question in relationship to time of use rates. But let me turn it over to Jason and Laura.
Thank you. So yeah, this topic has come up several times, as Bianca mentioned, and it even predates my involvement as interim director by a while. So, you know, we currently have two primary rates for residences. We have the R1 rate, which is what most residential homes are on, and we call that R1. And then we have the residential time of use rate, and we kind of call that TOUR because it's the time of use residential. So the time of use residential rate has an 1850 meter fee, just like the residential rate, but it says that it will be waived if it's a sub-metered or multi-metered load associated with an account that's already on an R1. So if you have a house and you have a meter, and then you have a detached garage where you have another meter, and your house is on the R1 rate, if you put that time of use rate on the second meter, you don't have any meter fees at all. And some people have a situation exactly like that. But other people have different scenarios where it doesn't make sense for them to have the time of use rate, either because it's going to cost more money because of when they charge a car or when they use their electricity, or because they can't have an R1 rate on the main house or whatever it is, right? So there's this subset of people who are being impacted by being charged a full 1850 on both meters. And you know, one of the primary jobs that the board has is to make sure we don't discriminate to ratepayers. And so we have to be very careful when we think of solutions to these problems. And as we talked about with the time of use thing, discussion earlier, there are a lot of implications to changing rates that apply to a lot of people. So for instance, if we want to change that R1 rate, it's going to require Carol and her team to have a lot of conversations with NISC, do a lot of test environment and building of, you know, sample data and running dummy bills, and then working with NISC to change the bill print, and then doing test bill prints, and then working with the printing vendor. So, you know, coming up with an interim solution when we're about to redesign our primary rate is a lot of work, and will actually detract and potentially push out that time of use process. So we're trying to be sensitive to the fact that we are going to redesign the rates for the vast majority of all of our customers. In November of last year, there was a rate brought up for discussion that attempted to solve the second meter fee for some of the applications where we saw it, and that was people who are using a second meter to charge electric vehicles. And so there was a rate, what's it called, residential EV. So the residential service electric vehicle charging separate meter rate. And the whole purpose of this was to charge a reduced rate, the $6.50 per month for that second meter fee, if it was to be used for electric charging or charging electric vehicle. So our question here, and we're not looking, we obviously didn't post a rate hearing, so we're not going to vote on a rate today. But the question here for the board and the discussion that we wanted to have was, is the board amenable to adopting this rate to solve this problem for the handful of people that are negatively impacted by this scenario, in order that we can better study the second meter, the ETS, the other issues that we talked about, in conjunction with the larger rate redesign that's going to happen in the next year? Or are we looking at doing something bigger than that right now? And so that's the kind of discussion that we'd like to have. And I don't know, Laura, before we turn it over to the board, did you want to add anything beyond that?
Just to clarify that, the situation that you mentioned, Jason, where people are getting two $18.50 charges, most of the complaints that we heard about that were coming from folks who were using that second rate to charge an electric vehicle. And the reason those customers typically don't choose the time of use rate for the second vehicle is because they don't drive their vehicle a lot. And CMLP offers a flat $10 per month credit if you agree to charge off-peak under the EV Miles program. You can't be on both time of use and get the $10 credit. So for some people who don't drive a lot, the $10 credit is a better deal for them than using the time of use rate to charge their vehicle off-peak. And that's why they typically select that. People with plug-in hybrids that don't drive a lot, and just people who just don't drive a lot in general. So that's kind of the customer class that we're looking at, or the customer profile that we're looking at, to address with this proposed electric vehicle charging rate. So that's just a little bit more information about how the rates work.
Thank you.
Yeah, before I go to other board comments, I want to, put my thumb on the scale a little here, in that I do think this is needs to be figured out very carefully when we go to time of use rates, this whole issue of second meter fees. My personal preference is to go with a short-term fix that helps these few customers in a modest way until that time, but let's not try to redesign the whole system between now and the time it's going to have to be redesigned to switch to time of use rates. But that's my preference. Other folks may feel differently. Brian.
So just to clarify Laura's comment, so someone on this rate would still be in the EV Miles program receiving the $10 bill credit, and then they would get the reduced from the $18.50 to the $6.50. That's the only changes?
No, the customer, to get the reduced $6.50, the customer has to opt into the separate meter EV rate.
Thus, we're giving up the EV Miles credit.
No, they would be able to keep that.
Oh, okay. So they could get this rate and still get the $10 credit.
Yes.
Okay. As a I mean, I hate this, but as a temporary solution, because this doesn't seem to have a solution. If someone receives the EV Miles credit and they pay $6.50 instead of $18.50, it's reducing the harm. It's not the right solution, but it is better. The fact that there's tiers in an EV charging rate bugs me, but I could understand from a billing perspective, this may be easier to implement. So yeah, as long as, I mean, the one of the big core issues is lack of virtual net metering, but that isn't going to get solved until we get further down the road. So yeah, unhappily willing to support.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Any other comments on this?
I would say, yeah, I'm also in favor, but I'm wondering why not have a rate hearing? Because then we're going to have to discuss this all over again.
Yeah, well, because in the past it's not been unclear, and what we didn't want to have was a rate hearing where it just went south again and we had a recommendation to come back, in 3 months with some other plans. So I think if the board is amenable to this idea, we can post that for the November meeting and get it taken care of.
And one additional comment, it is good for the board to see a rate, discuss our thoughts, and then the rate hearing is just a process where we give a month to notify customers that we're making a change. And if they come with new information, we have the choice to decline the rate, but it's a better process.
No, I get it. It's just that we've been discussing
Yes,
this been on the board.
I agree with you completely, Bianca. So, thank you. But, well, it's good that we now have a plan to move forward, but we will be coming back to discuss this issue again in the context of time of use rates. So it's only a temporary reprieve. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is the middle school.
Thank you. Just checking the time. We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, so that's great. So I wanted to give a high-level summary of what we've accomplished so far in the middle school project and then what we have left to do. First, let me give a procurement update and background. The light plant operates under Chapter 164 of state law, which gives it certain procurement options that are outside of Chapter 30B, which is what a municipality usually follows. But there are certain triggers and times where you have no choice but to follow Chapter 30B, or you might have to follow Chapter 149, which has to do with construction of public buildings, and this school is a public building. And remember that the town builds the school and then turns it over to the district. So right now, it's a town building or construction project. So we are going to be breaking this into two separate sub-projects. The solar and the switchboard is project number one, bid number one, and then the battery storage will be bid number two. So I'm going to walk through those and what they are and how they're going to actually be split up even further. So the solar switchboard bid is going to be the rooftop solar, and the switchboard is one thing with an add alternate for the canopy solar. And the reason that we're doing that is that early on, if you'll remember, when we got initial quotes from the construction company working on the school itself, the cost for putting in the footings, the 20-foot footings for these canopies was so astronomical that it questioned the viability of the project altogether. Luckily, we got some other pricing from another vendor that suggests that we're actually going to be okay. It might have just been this construction company's inability to find the right vendor to do the work or to get the quote, but it does seem like it's definitely possible. But because there's been some wide swings in that, we just want to see the pricing separate, right? So that we know that it's still going to be financially okay and fit in with the amount that town meeting has authorized us to borrow. Everything that we know right now leads us to believe that the solar on the roof and the solar on the canopies is still viable, and we're still moving forward with that, but we'll be able to see the two different prices. The switchboard is required if we do the canopies, and it's also something that we feel like if there's a problem with the canopy bid and we have to rescope it, we still want to have the option, because it will not require us to take down the power for the school or rework that whole system. And so it gives us more options in the future, and it also might even allow for other things down the road. So we want to move forward with the switchboard in conjunction with that. So then the second bid will be the battery storage. And so what we're looking to do for that is a turnkey solution where we'll have a vendor come in and do everything from the getting the battery there, installing it, commissioning it, and turning it over to us. So the bid package that we're talking about, we're going to focus first on the solar and switchboard one, contains different elements. So the first part is kind of the framework of the document, which is standard to the town of Concord. And so we have common elements that we put in there for how the process works and what people must submit. And we've got that. The next is the method of procurement. So as I mentioned, there's different ways that things can be procured. We have two separate attorneys who are working on this process with us and advising us on what's the right way to do this, the best way. It's definitely complicated by the fact that we have this Inflation Reduction Act credit and that we have certain timelines that we're trying to meet and certain coordination that's happening with the school construction. But they are the ones who are creating the framework for how we're going to be procuring this, and that is very important for the RFP itself. And then we have these stamped engineering drawings, which are, what the panel layout is going to look like, where everything physically is going to go. SDA has produced those, Solar Design Associates, and they work closely with SMMA, who is the architect for the school, to lay out everything there. And then we have the actual project requirements, which are text, describing the modules need to be of this wattage and they need to be of this size, and how everything is going to be interconnected. So we have that language done from SDA as well. And then, as I mentioned before, we talked to Baker Tilly several times, and they've given us a lot of feedback after collecting information from us on this project. And so we now know exactly what we need to do and what language we need to include to make sure that we have domestic content options. So when people will be bidding, they'll be bidding a domestic content, requirement threshold price, which will be to say, okay, if you can hit 40% domestic content, this is what the price and the bid will be. And if not, this is what the bid will be. And we want to be able to have that option so that we can see, because if we don't make domestic content, there is a penalty, right? So we need to make sure that the extra money that we spend on getting the domestic content is worth what we're getting in exchange for that. So we'll be able to see that. And then all of that right now is sitting with council so that they can create the package. And again, we have 2 people from this one law firm working on this, and we expect that back from them very soon, so that then we'll have the kind of the final draft. Typically at that point, we'd run it by the town's procurement team to make sure that it looks good from their perspective, and then we would work with our MCC PO certified person here at the light plant to get this advertised. So it needs to go in a newspaper, and it needs to be on the central register and things like that. So then the bid would be on the street. So typically there's a period of time where people are reviewing and deciding on this. They may include a site visit or optional site visit, the opportunity to book a site visit. So, we'd probably have the RFP open for a few weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, so that would give time for people to come and take a look at the site, review the drawings, ask questions. There's usually like an information session as well. We have to track all questions that come in and issue those as addenda. And then we'd be ready to move forward with the selection of and award the bid. So that's the first package: the solar, canopy, rooftop, and switchboard. And then the second package is the battery. So we've talked to many different suppliers and looking at different models. We know we're buying this battery, but in talking to other people about the big battery that we want to build, we've learned a lot about battery construction. We've talked to utilities, MLPs about their battery projects. So we feel like we know a lot. And one of the things we know is that we don't have the expertise to write this battery RFP ourselves. So we have contacted a few different vendors who do author RFPs and help with that process. If you'll recall, when we did the advanced metering system project, we hired a consultant who was incredibly helpful at bringing together the requirements to create the RFP and helping us screen the people who bid, and then actually awarding the bid. When they do this, they have good relationships with all the vendors already, and they can give you a lot of guidance on, paths to avoid or recommendations to be more successful. And the implications of missing something on the RFP for a multi-million-dollar battery are huge and well worth the small investment in getting a company who does this for a living to help us consult. So we've got these quotes back from them, and we're working on the procurement piece of that with a different council. And once we have a recommendation there, we'll be able to identify a vendor. We've told these people that our aspirational goal is to have this done this calendar year so that we have that RFP ready to go this year. Now, whether they're done and it's actually advertised this year or it's going to be in January or shortly after, we're not sure, but they've all been okay with that timeline. And I think, Laura, is it 6 weeks that we're thinking that 6 to 8 weeks that we're thinking that they need? Do you remember what the timeline from the majority was?
Yeah, there were some differences among the vendors in terms of how long I thought it would take. Some did go into the new year. But the one that we are focused on at the moment and believe will be the best fit for us does believe they can get it done by the end of the year. So we're hopeful about that. But we do need to get the legal opinion back so we can wrap up the contracting very soon, like this week.
Yeah. Yep, I did send council an email last night. So anyway, so that's where the battery portion of the project stands on the middle school. So the middle school building committee continues to meet and send updates. We've been following those. We haven't been asked to attend those meetings recently because they feel like the coordination is in a good place and that they know where we are. We do anticipate that the solar will be installed, after the school is open. And I know I saw in their last update that their schedule is very tight. They're still aiming for that February break occupancy, but That's remains to be seen if they're going to make that, or it might need to be pushed until April break or some other time. But we're thinking probably summer time frame would be great to not impede operations of the school. Also allow the roof to have time to present any issues, rain or penetration issues. Our panels are not expected to penetrate the roof, but the work that's up there, there can be a claim that workers poked a hole in this, or the panels were too heavy and they did that. So we feel like that's going to be a successful time frame for that. And we've been trying to communicate that to the internal stakeholders in the town as well, so that everybody's up to date on that. So, and Laura or Joe, feel free to jump in. Is there anything that you guys want to add? You can just shake your head or no. Okay. All right. So with that, Warren, I'd be happy to turn it over to the board and ask if anybody has questions or comments or concerns.
Good. Well, that all sounds good to me, but other comments or questions? Ryan?
And I thank you for digging into this and trying to keep it on schedule. You had said end of year, one of the vendors might be able to get it installed. Is it installed or win the contract by end of year?
The RFP developed by the end of the year.
End of year, that's right. Okay. So, yeah, I wanted to clarify that because I heard that and I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah, and we here expect a year for batteries, but we also have heard people, Laura, what was the one recently that was commissioned like 8 to 10 months or something?
Yes,
But-
6 to 10 months, I thought. So they're getting shorter.
Right. And I will say solar prices continue to fall, and interest rates continue to fall. So it's actually working well into our advantage for the timing of this project in terms of when we actually borrow the money and purchase the equipment. Lithium prices continue to fall too for batteries. Battery cell prices are falling.
Very cool.
John?
Yeah, just a quick comment. It seems like, Jason, you've done the team's done a great job in terms of how to package things. As you've laid it out, I mean, that's really, I think, an important element of the whole process. So it seems like there's a lot of good thought that's gone into that, and applaud you and the team for how you've structured it.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to have the subject matter experts that we have and the time that they're willing to spend on getting this right, because again, you can do things quickly and poorly, but in this case, I do feel like we've learned so much through the process. Like early on, I can't tell you how many times the bid package has changed where we thought we were going to do this and do that, but we've just learned a lot, and I feel very good with where we landed so that we know how we're going to do this, and it's going to be a more successful project as a result.
Great. Well, let's go on to liaison comments, and then we'll go to public comments. Cameron or Colin, do either of you have any comments or questions you want to make?
Not for me, thank you much.
Cameron?
No, just so really good job. Thanks, everybody. And I'll just be interested in, want to connect on the appointment of new board members. So I'll connect with Carrie on that.
Sounds good. Okay, Bianca.
Just a quick question on the audit. I know that obviously today we're not going to be reviewing it with the town. Do we have any kind of timeline on when that's going to come out? Just for my own planning purposes and yeah.
So what I was told yesterday by Scott, the partner at Markham, is that he thought this was a 1 to 2 week at the most process. He really thought it was going to be done for the meeting today, and apologized that it wasn't. But so I'm guessing that the final document will be available in the next week or two. So then we just need to schedule a meeting with that board. So I'd guess it'd be in 3 weeks timeframe.
Okay.
Because we definitely want to give the people a chance to read it and digest it. We don't want to have the meeting the day we get the final.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Any public comments? Well, there's Pamela, are you looking to make a comment?
Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. This is so wonderful. All this wonderful information. You mentioned that, I believe, Laura, that we have some, or Jason, that we have some meters that would connect directly to the fiber optic system. Would that be, would those allow people that don't want the RFD type connections to get smart meters so that they could participate in the time of use rates?
Eaton unfortunately does not have, no US vendor does have a hard wire. Oh, I'm just gonna mute you real quick, Pamela, but feel free to unmute in a second. No US vendor that provides meters actually has a fiber connection to a meter. So the way that it works is that it talks to an ONT that Concord Broadband has nearby. So that instead of having to go meter to meter to meter to meter to meter to meter to the gateway, it can go meter to meter. And then if that meter is close enough to an existing ONT that's already out there, then it doesn't have to keep sending the RF signal to other meters and create the wider mesh so that it can jump on the fiber network sooner. So it's not directly got fiber wired into the meter. It's just more going onto an ONT that's already there sooner. Sorry.
Oh,
Anything else?
yes, please. I think it's wonderful also the way that you are doing advanced planning about the rate setting, because I think that's the most important thing we can do. What we do with the rates incentivizes consumer behavior, our behavior. And we've got to be careful to incentivize green energy and producing our energy, which includes consumer storage, batteries, and as well as all electric buildings. And I think we should consider having a special lower rate for heat pump residences to incentivize that. And I know John was talking about making sure that our rates are fair to everyone, that we treat our customers equally. But we can't make it fair to everyone if we treat our customers equally, because we have to have people all doing the good thing in order to have the benefit for the entire town. And so it isn't unfair to charge more than the extra cost for things like opting out of the time of use rates. In fact, it is a more fair thing to do that because we all benefit from everyone that uses time of use rates to change their behavior. And we need finances to fund the incentive programs that we use to give people incentives for switching to EVs, and incentives for installing solar, and incentives for battery things. And the only way we have to do that is with our rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. Thanks. So, does anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
A second? Thanks,
second.
Bianca. John,
Yes.
Bianca,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and this is Warren. I say yes as well. I want to thank the staff for all their great work. We're making some good progress, and we'll see you all next month.